And that kind of is kind of how my leading has always been, where I don't have a million choices. All doors shut, one door opens. It's just kind of how it's always been for me.
Our guest this week is lifetime producer Jeffery David. Jeff has worked in the music industry for the entirety of his life, producing tracks independently and also as a musical director for his church. He has collaborated with superstars like Zedd and built his success from the ground up. Most recently, in addition to being a top-tier producer, he also manages the chart-topping band Echosmith, who also happens to be his family. Jeff joins us to discuss his experience in the music industry and how a glass-half-full mentality can make all the difference on this episode of The Big Break.
Where are you calling us from today?
Well, I live in Pasadena, California, right by the famous Rose Bowl where they do the Rose Parade.
Mm-hmm.
And it's 25 minutes, from downtown LA, which has now become kind of a thing.
Yeah, exactly. You're at home with the rest of us, at home together, as it were. How you guys been coping with all of this, staying at home?
Well, it's interesting because the big bite, of course, is the fact that the band that I manage, Echosmith,
mm-hmm.
They can't tour. So that's been a drag. But when we're off tour, we're pretty much home anyway. I have a full, recording studio here. I have artists that are coming in and out, and people usually just come to me. So in some ways, it's not really any different.
Are you able to get some recording sessions done, even with? Are you doing it there in the studio, or are you doing it virtually, or have you been playing around with anything like?
No, I'm not really. No, what we've been mostly doing is I've been sort of taking this time to we just finished a headliner tour for Echosmith, and then
mm-hmm.
I produced their record too, and I'll get into that later. But it just took some time to sort of take a breather because we've been grinding. We just released a record and shot 12 music videos, and so we've just been using this time to take a breather. We actually kind of became obsessed about, buying and selling stocks, which has been fun. And that's been cool. And doing that. And then the band, we decided to not totally take time off, but to grind it out and also launch what we call a digital world tour. So we basically have been booking shows. We have about 15 on the docket that we've been doing from our great room. It's called a living room for everybody else, but in these old Pasadena homes, you call them a great room because it's a big old, large space. It's kind of fancy. And back in the day, people used to eat in one section, and have some cigs in another section, and then dancing in another, and someone playing piano. It's kind of like a mini ballroom in a way, They're really cool.
All right. Well, listen, I know we're going to dig into a lot of that here in a little bit. I think that's interesting in itself. So I'll definitely keep my notes down for that. But let me get started. If I could, maybe we could start a little bit earlier and just the first question I always ask was basically taking the Wayback Machine here and just talking a little bit about your early life and how you first kind of got into music in general. I don't even mean as a career, right? I'm talking about just as someone who, just began appreciating music in maybe a different way than others might,
Yeah, well, I was really young, and I started with piano, and it was one of those things that my parents really pushed me to do. Nobody in the family was really musical. They sang in like the church choir, stuff like that. But I reluctantly did it, but I was always singing and always like really into the radio and records. I had an older brother who was listening to all this old school stuff. He's way older than me. So he was into like the Doobie Brothers and the early like Paul or like Wings and stuff. I didn't even really know who the bands were. I didn't appreciate it then. And I associated it with a really funny memory because whenever even to this day, whenever I hear like, I don't even know what this song was like. That song is like doing what the man says or any of that.
Yeah.
Those kinds of songs. I have a terrible memory. And here's why, because my older brother, I was 4 or 5, I don't know, 5 maybe. I remember him putting all his friends were over. It was real smoky, and he was putting his face over this thing that had bubbles that he was blowing into, and smoke was coming out. I didn't know what it was. And I remember telling my parents, because I feel like he wasn't giving me attention. So I remember telling my parents he wasn't really watching me. He was just with his friends playing with this bubble machine and listening to his music. And then all I remember next is hearing to this music, doing what the man, my brother being spanked with a belt by my dad. Going, Jeffrey, why you jerk? Psh, psh, doing what so whenever I hear any of that stuff, I picture my brother fully getting spanked with a belt because I told on him. And I didn't know. You know what I mean?
It's the sounds of corporal punishment to, a
70s
Paul McCartney 70s refrain. That's fantastic. I love it.
And honestly, to this day, it's a joke. I can have fun with it now, but I really don't like hearing that stuff. I don't really appreciate it. I don't like it, and it's because of that.
That's an interesting story. I love that. But so then that's that. But it kind of raises the question though. Like that might have been maybe your earliest music memories and whatnot. But what was the thing that made you kind of dive into it more? I mean, the reason I ask this question is that, everyone, I could talk to anybody and everyone has different layers of how much they like music. Lots of people are music fans. Some of us are a little bit more music nerdy than others and that kind of thing. But then there's another layer of folks like, yourself that went from just enjoying music as a listener to someone that went to actually, usually starts with performing music and then onwards to creating music. And that's a different layer. And I'm always kind of curious as to how that layer formed.
Well, everybody has a different road getting there. So I grew up and I was, I started playing piano and I was really, really, really into it. So once I learned how to play a song, I was so hooked and just so into it. Nobody had to ask me to practice. I was nonstop playing every moment that I possibly could. And, early, I did that all through elementary and was in like piano competitions, really getting into classical music. And I studied with someone, only took 3 teachers. I grew up down in San Diego, in Coronado, it's called. And I quickly realized at all these piano competitions that I was never going to be good enough to beat out all these kids that I was competing against. So I would practice 2-3 hours a day. And there was kids that I was playing against who were Russian or from different parts of the world that just had the most insane practice discipline and schedule to the kind of families that they were in, that they would just play they would be practicing 5 hours a day and they're just slaughtering me at these competitions. So I'm like, I'm never going to get those classical gigs. There's only like 100 of them that are real that you can make a living from. I knew early on. So I'm like, I'm in love with, I also love band. So I was like early on, now I'm in junior high and I learned how to play drums too. So I discovered U2. And for me, U2 was everything. I loved all the alt indie stuff too, the Alarm, the English Beat, all that kind of stuff. I loved that stuff, 80s music. So I was playing in bands and I played drums in one and I sang in another. I learned to play guitar. I felt like piano was a great basis to learn all these other instruments. They were kind of easy for me because piano was just so.
It's the foundation, right?
It's the foundation.
That's it.
Yeah. And that's why you always, whenever you're looking in like a heavy situation with a keyboard player, the keyboard player is probably by far the heaviest musician and they're the most knowledgeable because it's kind of holding the whole thing together. You're like, you sort of become a producer kind of from day one if you're playing piano in a band, talking about arrangements and stuff. So
right, yeah, you got to know both sides of it, both clefs, both the back and the front, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah, the whole thing. And so I played drums in some bands, and then like I said, I played keys and sang in another one. But I quickly learned also, even though I was like kind of the best drummer in my school, not that their competition was so crazy because Coronado was an island, it's a tiny little school, but I always realized whatever band I was in, everybody had an opinion about what the drummer should do. And it's the only instrument that everyone has an opinion. People have no idea how to play drums, and you're using all 4 limbs. It's like one of the hardest instruments on earth to play. All 4 limbs are playing something completely independent. Yet a bass player dude who's playing at the time, roots only, has a million ideas for what I should be doing. And it just really drove me nuts. And as a keyboard player and kind of young budding producer, I'm like, I know more than this guy could ever tell me. Drums were never enough. And I didn't want to be in the position of people having an opinion every second. So I got into college. I went to a school called Azusa Pacific University. By this time I started to do gigs, side gigs. I would go play, I discovered jazz too. So I'd go play a jazz gig on drums or keys in another, and I started to get paid. And I really liked it. And I always ended up being the leader of the bands. And one reason was I was the most driven by far. And secondly, I realized if you were the leader, you could get paid a little bit more because you probably were the dude getting the gig. You're probably finding the gig. So I always had a business side. Go ahead.
Yeah. Let me jump in here just real quick. So first of all, you went to college. What did you go to college to study at that time?
Composition and then drum.
Oh, okay. So you were going in for music.
Yeah, for music. It's a private school called Azusa Pacific University. And I went there and I really loved it. And
then in terms of the gigs that you were picking up, how were those developing? Were you out seeking them out? Were there like, this is the paper with the little, the little phone number that you rip off the bottom type of thing? Like how are you getting hooked up with these other groups?
I'm creating my own destiny at all times. That's probably the one thing that is for sure in every level that I've had to do. I've had to go get it. I've had to go open the door. I've had to go figure it out, hustle. There's stuff I'll get into later that just explains a lot of the stuff. I just grind it out. But so
you were seeking these out.
I would seek them out. I literally would go spend, either be on the phone. They didn't have cell phones very much then. I'd be on the phone, or I would go to every restaurant or wherever my wife and I got married early too. I'll get into that. But whenever we went out to eat, I would ask to speak to the manager and start off with a compliment like, "Oh, I love the food, man. And have you ever thought about having some live jazz here? Really cool, And he's like, "Maybe." I'm like, "Well, let's play Friday night, and I'll do it cheap. We usually get 1,000. We'll do it for 500." And he was like,
"This is one band that you have. So you have a band. You have a band that you're then hustling for. Then you and your band show up, or is that the case, or do you have like different crews?"
No, it was two bands that I was the leader of. So one was
what were their names?
Dorian Gray. Another one's called 43rd Street.
Dorian Gray. That's an interesting.
Yeah, I don't even remember why we named it that. Some stupid reason. I remember Dorian Gray. I played keys in. And then 43rd Street, I purposely found monster musicians that were all way older than me. And I was now becoming obsessed about, competing and being as good as possible. And I had, that band was really wonderful because that band also taught me so much on, just everything about playing in a band, like holding down the groove, about like not overplaying. And I still made more than all them because I booked the gig, but it was like going to school too. It was really cool.
Okay. And when you were in school, you were studying music. I'll call it that. Basically, yep. I forgot composition. Something else. What was the goal there? What were you planning, at least at that time, to come out of school to do?
Well, the thing is, I didn't really know much, to be honest. It's like I didn't grow up in a family where it was like, "Hey, here's the path you should take." They knew that I was a music major, and my parents and my dad was in business and my mom was a homemaker. They didn't really know what to tell me to do. So I went to a music school, and they didn't want me to go to one at the beach because I was really getting into surfing, and they figured I would just screw around and surf. And so I went to the school. I didn't really know, other than I knew I wanted to do music for a living. Now, at the same time, I was heavily involved at my local church, wherever I went. And back then, it was really cool. And there was a lot of innovation going on. And a lot of great musicians were in there. And then, so on the weekends, I would be playing and leading music at churches. And that was super cool because I could really I could learn so much by playing in front of people, these captive audiences of 500, 1,000 people or something like that. And that was massive in my development. That I'll get more into that, but the church world and what I ended up going on to do through the church world completely prepared me for every success I've ever had.
Okay. So you knew you were into music, you wanted to study music. You weren't really sure where that was going to go, but you figured, get on the path and see where it leads, and you'll figure things out along the way, basically.
Correct.
Roughly.
Maybe be a session musician. I was into that, I loved writing songs, but I didn't know. I would maybe do it all,
Right. So you just experience everything and see what really takes hold and whatnot. So did you finish school or not?
I did. I was 3 credits shy of the degree because I was finished and I was ready to walk. And then they're like, "This conducting class you took doesn't qualify anymore. You got to do one more semester." I'm like, "Screw it. I'm not going back for one more semester." and I already, I did the full 4 years or whatever. So I'm like, just whatever.
Okay.
But yeah, I pretty much finished.
All right, and then because I know the church experience was, I mean, reading through your bios and whatnot, you spent quite a bit of time as a musical director there. So was it right into that then?
No. So the first 3 years, I got married in 92, my last year of college, and my wife's first year. And we met, she played oboe, and we had to take this class. I despised it, but now I would appreciate it. But back then, yet it was something where everybody had to sing in Latin and there was a full orchestra. I don't know why I didn't appreciate it, because I was a band. I was so into rock bands and jazz.
Right.
Anyway, and I saw her and she played oboe and I thought she was so cute. Anyway, we only knew each other 6 months and we eloped in Las Vegas and freaked our parents out. This was not something that my parents were wanting us to do, And anyway, so the first 3 years of being married, I had those two bands, Dorian Gray and 43rd Street. And every single night I was playing in a club. And my wife was with me. We had a kid right away. And my little kid, my wife, it was like an outside terrace or something. We'd be playing jazz. My wife would come, and then we would go to Denny's after at like midnight and then sleep in and shop or go to the beach and do the whole thing again. So immediately we were like doing that thing. And then on the weekend, I was leading what they call worship, music directing at churches. So 3 years doing that. And then all the clubs out of the blue completely just stopped.
The clubs stopped. They stopped hiring you, or they
just every gig that was
just dried up.
Yeah. Everything dried up. Everything that was on the books, gone. And then out of the blue, I get a call from this guy named Dudley Rutherford, this kind of Southern preacher dude. And he's like, hey, man, we heard really good things about you. Would you be interested in being our music director? We're a really fast-growing young church. A lot of really cool people go here. Some of the girls from En Vogue and a lot of session musicians and all. It was in the Valley in L.A. And he goes, you can really dream up any dream you can do as long as it's not like, uncomfortable or evil or something.
Sure, it's got to be appropriate for the venue. It's a church, like yeah.
And of course, I believe in God and stuff, so I'm not going to do anything that's going to push some weird edge anyway. So, in that environment, so I accepted it, and I felt like that was a clear sign, and that's that kind of is kind of how my leading has always been, where I don't have a million choices, all doors shut. One door opens. It's just kind of how it's always been for me. And
that's interesting, man. So I can see a lot of people kind of bemoaning that to a certain extent, right? Like, I had all these doors, I was doing all these things, and all of a sudden they all shut, and only, like, quote unquote, only one became available. That's one sort of bemoaning perspective. But then the other perspective is more like, well, that's, all these other distractions went away and the clear path emerged. I mean, there's different ways it's a mindset and how you kind of decide how you want to respond to that kind of situation.
Yeah. It's just like, I don't know. Sometimes it's just like, for me, it's just like, I need that, like, duh, that's the only door open, go, move forward, Okay.
So. And so what does that mean, music director? What were you doing? Were you just like, you had the whole band and you were directing the band like a conductor or something like that? What is that?
No, it's hard to explain if you've never been in it, but if you can just Google, for any of your listeners can Google, go look up a church called Hillsong United or Hillsong.
Oh, Hillsong. Yeah.
That kind of thing. So I was, early on this stuff. So way early in the 90s, I told the pastor, I'm like, if you let me really control my budget, the music department budget, I'm going to use it to pay guys. And I'm going to make the music so compelling the very first weekend. Like, I'm going to make it world-class the first weekend if you let me control this budget and spend the money on people rather than lights or new keyboards or whatever people spend money on in these environments. And nobody was paying musicians at the time. Like, that was not something you did. You basically had guys that go to the church, use them, and some dude that, kind of plays guitar, picks up a guitar and plays in your band.
No, I totally get it. I've been there.
Yeah. Like weekend warriors, not that there's anything wrong with having a day gig, but if you don't care about your instrument, I'm certainly not going to let you learn in front of 1,000 people on a weekend. No dice. And I told the pastor, basically, it's like, are you going to let someone learn how to speak on the weekend for you? You know what I mean? And he's like, oh no, I get it. Once you start
So
putting,
yeah, you approach this as a job. This isn't like a hobby. You're not going
no,
to
there's a full-time job.
This is your career. You have a passion about this that is equal to, if not more, maybe than just going to church on weekends. Not to criticize anyone who does that, like you said, but you're taking this from a professional standpoint. You want others around you to have that same professional standpoint.
Exactly. Now, the thing is like, I'd never really, of course, I've always been in charge, right? So each environment that I was in charge. I was a leader. So this was more of that, putting bands together. So I was really in this kind of vibe of like, I'm going to take this to another level, and I'm going to really push the boundaries musically on what I could do. So immediately I was like in this thing of like every week, and this is probably weird now. Maybe it's too much now, but I had this approach of every weekend that you came, we were never going to give you the typical expected. So I got to do anything I wanted, man. I was like, I had ska bands. I was like using DJs that like scratched, like turntable scratchers, like what, and samples and I would like put a DJ together with like some of the girls from In Vogue and then a string section, like stuff that nobody was doing, or like a ska band with like a string quartet. I wanted to make it as musically compelling as possible. And the cool part was I had to pretty much write a new song every week on whatever the pastor was speaking on. So that was massive. That was massive training right there, because I could learn and see how a song affected, as this church was growing into the thousands now, how a song that I wrote either moved people or didn't. And how certain things that I did and arranged and putting different instruments and people together, or using a cello or ending in a minor key or whatever that is, I could start seeing in real life how it could make people cry or smile, and I would get letters all the time, and people would be like, oh my gosh, that song, I feel like you just told my life story. Were you looking at my diary? And so you start to get this feedback of what works as a songwriter and a producer. And that was massive.
That's really interesting. I mean, and so there's actually two levels to that, right? One is the songwriter component, like and even on top of it, you're talking. You're not just writing completely out of the blue. You're writing to a theme that is being set and that's changing on a regular basis. So there's a collaboration there with the I guess the pastor giving the sermons and things like that, correct? So on one hand, you have to kind of understand where he's going with it and create something that fits that theme. And then on the other hand, you have to also then interpret that for the others that you're bringing in to actually do the perform the songs and things like that. So you got to manage the rest of the crew at the same time. I could just see how that's a great sort of safe testbed area for you to develop skills in that regard.
Yeah, and then and then stuff that you don't realize that you're doing is like, okay, now I'm over 300 people in the arts department that I'm over. I'm hiring and firing. I'm over a large budget. I have to be in charge of every single thing that happens around the message. And all of a sudden you're like giving feedback to like maybe the mayor's there to guest and do the welcome, and you got to like shave off 30 seconds. Or I remember having to interact with John Wooden, that famous UCLA coach who went there.
Yeah.
John, that was a rad welcome, but we got to cut off 45 seconds because 7,000 kids get out after the service for the next service, that there's going to be a traffic jam or whatever. And so it taught me to like also not be too precious about my art, and also to be in these environments that normally a typical musician would never be giving John Wooden feedback on his welcome for the morning and working with my craft. So
sure.
It kept putting me, I kept showing up in places. I remember I got to lead music, and it was like with all these head NFL coaches, like I started to be in places that weren't your typical music settings. It was really fun, and it just taught me a lot, and I kept learning and taking.
How big was this church? I mean, this isn't just like the corner chapel here, right?
No, now that church is 15,000 people. So,
unbelievable.
So okay. You got to realize that this is run like a full-on U2 concert. But back then, it's like nobody was doing like what we were doing. No one was using DJs and stuff. I'm not talking like Zedd, and we love Zedd. I know him. I'm talking like scratchers, like guys, in the 80s and stuff.
Yeah.
Even though
the original DJs.
Yeah, this is like late 90s. But still, it just, again, if this whole environment of especially hiring and firing and then forecasting out 8, 10, 12 weeks on what the pastor was speaking on, and having grids and songs. And then we started to write dramas with actors, and we would start to incorporate different things within the music, like mixing media. So we used to do this thing all the time where like, instead of a bridge to a song, so let's say a song's like, we never talk about it. And it's this song that I wrote, and it's this thing about relationships. Instead of a bridge, a vocal bridge, all of a sudden, maybe we have like an actor stand up in the middle of the audience that no one knows is an actor and be like, hey, wait a minute. And maybe they have a mini argument with his fake wife or whatever. Or, one hilarious example, and this doesn't always go good. It sounds like it's all going great, right? The way I'm describing, but I remember specifically, we wanted to mix media with video. So not like a music video, but like, a movie clip within like a song, like instead of a bridge, let's play this movie clip. So one particular instance, this went well a lot, but one particular time, it didn't go so well. And the guy who was the editor, he couldn't do the edit. So I had to by hand have the guy in the booth. And you have a full tech booth, like, 10 people in there working, on lighting and cameras and sound and all this. So you have the guy, it was a DVD player that was going to push play and push stop. It was already cued. You can't mess this up, right? So the song's happening. I'll use that, never talk about it again. Example, we never talk about it. This song I wrote, here comes the bridge. It's going to be rad. It's going to be this Bruce Willis moment. And then all of a sudden, push play. The guy panics, accidentally pushes forward, panics, push play. And all you hear is, you mother effer.
Oh my goodness.
And so then that was the bridge, and then that wasn't cool. You know what I mean?
No. But it happens.
And then the pastor gets up. He's like, hey, well, you heard it here first. I didn't say it, something joke. He made a joke of it, which I appreciate. But,
so you're in this. This is great. This is fantastic. You're in this really wonderful sandbox on that's exposing to so many things. You get to write and be wildly creative in all these different formats, like you just mentioned. Sometimes you screw it up, sometimes you don't. You're in the business. You're understanding the budgeting. You're understanding the people management. You're directly collaborating with the pastor on kind of writing the songs. It's great. It sounds fantastic, right? But I'm just kind of wondering, is there a point here while you're doing all this stuff where you're kind of thinking, is this sandbox getting too small for me? I need to do more. I need to stretch my wings here a little bit outside of the church.
Yeah. What was happening that I noticed right away was the fact that I also was, having zillions of meetings of confrontations or firing people and all of a sudden it was like, this is not nearly as fun. And we're trying to take this at such a next level that we're kind of trying to make everything too perfect. And so that became a thing where like if a welcome or a song didn't go exactly as planned or literally perfect, my whole week started to feel ruined.
Right. From able to work in a setting with almost no expectations, and now the expectations are sort of driving the ship a little bit.
Yeah, because we also were like all about like the thing that I learned in there. This is a huge one. It's all about casting vision, right? And so you're casting vision all the time, and you're like wanting to make these weekends amazing, and you have 168 hours in a week. We should make these 5 services, 5 hours. We should make them as meaningful as possible. So that was happening, and I was getting not bummed, but a little burned. And it's like, gosh, all these people that I'm over and I have to fire friends, people that like quit a job that, that I wanted to hire and they ended up not being very good at it. And you have to fire your friends, that quit like real jobs, that like a serious job. He's going to be your technical director, and he comes to work for you and then he ends up sucking at his job. Well, there's no room to suck. And hopefully you get better and you give him feedback. But if they keep sucking, you got to get rid of them, just like any job. And again, so whatever. So at the same time, I was producing records inside the church. So the church, I basically built in a budget that I could do my own records. I wrote these songs, these worship songs are called, and I could be producing these records, kind of my own art outlet, and people would buy them. The church would, of course, pay for it and they get a nice cut of it. And then I would get some. It wasn't about that, but it was teaching me how to produce records with someone else's budget. And then I was taking what I was learning live at these services in front of thousands of people and incorporating in the studio. And I loved having a hodgepodge of musicians that normally would never know each other and what would happen. Very Quincy Jones, let great people do great things, set up a table, so to speak. And I was getting really into the studio. So, and then artists within the church and then outside the church were asking me to produce their records. So at the same exact time, and I was never satisfied with doing one thing. So full-time, legitimate, real job in the church, over 300 staff, churches, thousands of people, now producing records equally pretty much full-time.
As a growing artist or songwriter, keeping royalties coming in is important for keeping the bills paid. It's also important to keep an eye on those royalty payments. A lot of people we worked with here at Royalty Exchange were having a tough time making sense of the royalties they were getting paid. So we built a free tool called Know Your Worth that automatically analyzes every royalty payment made on your music. It breaks it all down in an easy-to-understand analysis with some insights that would be impossible to find elsewhere. Plus, it connects you with the thousands of investors on Royalty Exchange and allows them to make you offers on your music. So far, musicians have raised over $1 million for new projects, new ventures, and a whole lot of other things just through the Know Your Worth app. If you're earning royalties, you should be keeping track of them, and Know Your Worth makes it easy. It only takes about 3 minutes to connect an account, and the tool will automatically update over time. Just visit worth.royaltyexchange.com or find the link in the show notes to get started. Now, let's get back to the interview.
Now, when you say producing records for artists in the church, let's get to that, because you mentioned that this church had some relatively big names in attendance. You mentioned the girls from En Vogue, for instance, and whatnot. What are we talking about here? Is this how you're getting your producer jobs? Because folks that are, congregants of the church asking you to produce their records.
Well, a side thing that happens, which is really fun, is the fact that you're doing your thing, and then you're like, you're not doing it for this reason, but it just happens this way. So the music is just killing at this church, okay? And everyone knows it's me. And so, I have John Patitucci, Mike Elizondo, Chris Chaney, all these amazing musicians and singers. And people are like, this guy's really good. So people that go to the church, they want to go to a cool church, and music's cool. And, what drives these kinds of churches is great music, great kids, great preaching, so to speak, So just people would approach me all the time. It's like, hey, would you be willing to produce my record? I'll give you $5,000. I'll give you $7,000. I'll give you $10,000. It's like, all self-funded, and I didn't get to do anything big yet. But I was definitely getting my chops, and I'm glad I didn't get to do anything gigantic from the start. It was great to get my chops up. And
for sure. And we're going to get back to that kind of when we wrap things up, because I like to kind of pull the themes out and sort of summarize them. But let's move to these were all good little one-off projects and whatnot. What was the big? I don't know. Was there one quantum leap that happened here in terms of who you were writing for, or who you were producing for?
No, I was just cranking. I was literally the guy for indie records where I lived. I was, married, and I was having a bunch of kids too. So I was just making a wonderful living producing indie records. I was making on average $20,000 a month at times, and it was just like, okay, I think I want to be done with the church thing. I want to still go to church, and my faith hasn't changed. But I don't want to be hiring and firing over 300 people. So
your side gig became the main gig.
My sidekick became the main gig. And I took all those things that I learned: casting vision, hiring and firing, managing budgets, being a nice person, being good to work with. And I started to produce indie records. And it was.
And how are these? And how is this coming to? Is this still basically people that they're members of the church and they're reaching out to you?
No, I didn't go to. I decided not to go to that same church anymore. So I wanted to get out of there, but everyone knew who I was, kind of in that area. It was 30 minutes east of Los Angeles, called Chino, and kind of Orange County, and just you were doing an indie record, you didn't have $200,000. And you want it to be great, you're probably going to go to me or a few other people. At the time, this guy Busby was doing a lot.
So this is just a general network. The community knew of each other. There wasn't any particular shingle on the wall.
Because you would go, if you did a record for somebody, and they would go share it with all their friends, whether it did great or not.
Okay.
Word of mouth. And I always would try to outdo myself, even if that meant I didn't make much money. But I figured out some things quickly, how to really be useful with my time. I became super fast in the studio, and I would use guys that if I wasn't playing on it, I'd have one guy, this guy, Aaron Sterling, is just a brilliant drummer. And this guy, Matt Bissonette, who's a brilliant bass player, just played on a zillion records. Well, these two guys could memorize songs like you would. Most of the time, they didn't even need a chart. So they could literally memorize. They have weirdo memories, photographic musical memories, and they could memorize a song. And so after hearing it once, especially Aaron, and this guy's to the point where I remember one of my friends used him and he showed him a song. He was like, this is a song we're going to do in 2 weeks. And then he came to the session 2 weeks later and my friend somehow lost the session. He's like, oh my gosh, he just got there and Aaron was all set up with cartage and all this. Like, I lost the session. And you're like, what was it called? He's like, oh, this one. He goes, oh, that one you played for me in the car. Oh, I know it. So like 2 weeks later, he still knew it after hearing it one time in the car, like for real, every single part. So we just played it down to a click with no music and it was perfect.
Wow.
So I could use my friend Aaron and Matt and they could do up to 20 to 25 songs in a day. So I would record drums and bass. And these are the who's who of players. And they could do like 20 to 25 songs in a day. And it was brilliant takes. I could get great stuff out of them and they were great.
All right. So you're banging the stuff out. Time in the studio is money, right? As we all know. So you're efficient and it's working and people are coming back to you and so on. So then like what happened? I'm looking through the bio. I'm like, how does this lead to, say, some of the more recognizable household names that you work with? Not to dismiss the indies, because trust me, that's a career right there.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. Remember, I told you how like my path had been like one of everything goes away or whatever. So all of a sudden, all the indie records went away. Okay,
they went the way of the clubs.
So one huge piece of this thing is, okay, so I got married 22-ish, my wife was 18. We were having kids right away. I was doing this church thing, making records. Artists were in and out of the house all day long. And I was having kids. So I had 4 kids, dude, like really quickly. Okay. I always wanted a big family. My wife's really cool, rad cook and whatever. And so these kids were around all of these session guys. And I've like from day one, my kids had drum machines, keyboards, guitars, this kind of thing. So I had these brilliant musicians who were brilliant, like really early. So I was going to help them skip all the dorky steps that I had to go through, like no shredding, no like prog music, no, like let's be listening and grow yourself on like U2 and Coldplay and like songwriter, real songs. So that's a massive part of it. So when I quit the church in 2006-ish, I had this other little side business I won't get into called the Lesson House that I started that was actually very successful. I sold that in 2008. Okay. And I was producing all these indie records and everything was going, was going wonderful. Well, all the indie records go away, but at the same time, my kids were super serious. I would use them in the studio in the session. They're like, we want to be a band and we want to be serious about it. So that was part of the journey of me quitting the church. So I'm producing records. In 2008, I quit the church, and they're serious about being a band. This is completely part of the whole story. Mm-hmm. That I was developing this band, my 4 kids who were brilliant, like a young Coldplay, like brilliant players and writers. And so I quit. And right at the time I was producing records and I quit the church, we got in the studio and wrote this song called Ipod. And so I didn't really know anybody, even in the church world. I knew some of these artists and I knew like loads of session musicians, but I didn't really know anybody in the music industry at all. Okay. I didn't know record label people. I didn't know publishers. I was cold calling and emailing. And I subscribed to this service called Music Express, and it was a directory that had everybody's email and phone number in it. Okay. This was crucial to me getting anywhere. This was massive because when I quit, unlike most dudes, I had 4 kids. I had 3 of them in private school. I had a mortgage. Right. I had a Range Rover. Like I had like, that's those expenses. Those aren't bragging points. These are pressure points.
No, I totally get it. Trust me.
I day one have to be completely grinding. So I am reaching out all over planet Earth. And on average, I'm not joking. I'm sending at least 100 cold emails out 5 days a week, all over planet Earth. So what I started doing was my indie records. What started happening, what really wanted me to get out of it, and I'm glad I did, was what you find is anybody that has real money, 80% of them are really like not great. Let's just be really honest. It's a soccer mom. It's a whatever. It's a person, it's someone who married money, whatever it is, because real artists in general are broke. They don't know how to have a job. They don't have any money. So the indie part of this whole thing was I was really feeling like I can get stuck in this thing. Even though I'm making $10,000, $20,000 minimum every month, cranking it out, I don't want to get stuck in this. I want to produce real records. I want to write songs that the
Right.
world hears. So what I started doing was I wrote most of the songs on I pretty much wrote all of them, all the songs on these indie records. And I would reuse that track, and I would begin to write songs to those tracks from those indie records. That those records didn't go anywhere because maybe they were decent or whatever, but maybe they didn't sell, or like I had these brilliant sounding tracks. So I started to write songs of the tracks, send these tracks out all over the world for top liners to write to. And then I started to get cuts on other artists because the track sounded sick. All we needed was new melodies. Now, we never, in general, all the first cuts, none of those original exact versions of someone's indie record using that track, none of those got released, like rehashed to be released, but they were great writing ground. They were great inspiration grounds to write something brand new and redo a track later to a whole new song. But I basically had hundreds and hundreds of these tracks that I made that sounded brilliant. Then I started to get cuts. And so then for a minute before I quit the indie thing and they went away, that was actually fueling and helping grow my songwriting career. And I was getting placements with real artists. And at the same time, go back to that song we wrote called Ipod with Echosmith, my 4 kids. And there was a feeding frenzy with people I only read about coming to my house, obsessed about the band. And
hold on a second. I need to jump in here. So I might be a little off on the timeline. So maybe you can set me straight. So Echosmith is your band, but I also know that you were working with this. So you quit the church. You're doing the indie stuff. I'm just looking at the list of some other artists here that you've worked with, like Zedd and Seal, and you've got the cuts on the Voicing Glee and whatnot. Did all that happen before you started talking about what you're talking about now with Echosmith, or is Echosmith leading to that?
Echosmith led all of that.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to. Okay, good. Sorry, didn't want to interrupt, but I was a little bit off on my timeline, so that's what I wanted to understand. So you cut this, you create the song, bam, it's getting attention. People are hitting you up.
So I start. It didn't. I mean, people are hitting me up, songwriters and stuff like that. So yes, I mean, it isn't going crazy, but things are happening. I'm getting more cuts now. Publishers are like, okay, this is cool. That's a great song. Who wrote that? Oh, Jeffery David. Oh, he's really cool. And
maybe he wrote something else. Okay. Yeah.
And at the time, though, it was all very tied in. Where I was like, you know what, my way up to really be known is to develop this band and make them as successful as humanly possible and be completely attached to it, because I was developing the whole thing. I not only was like helping write every single song and producing records, I was like funding stuff. I was sparing no expense to go chase this dream. And so my main focus was, at the time before the indie record stopped, was fully developing Echosmith as far and big as I could get them and getting them a record deal and getting cuts at the same time by other artists. That was the focus. And the way that it paid bills was the indie records.
I see. Okay. So as I'm looking at all of this stuff, these are very interesting and also very unique ways of a lot of the different careers that I've discussed on this show, and that you had all the stuff that you were doing sort of externally, right? Church and the indie records and all these things. But, the title of the podcast is The Big Break, right? And if I were to ask you what your big break was, it sounds like, and this is where you tell me if I'm wrong, it sounds like your big break was really discovering your own children and writing the song with them.
It was developing my own Coldplay that was in my house.
That's amazing.
And just to give you perspective, like this doesn't just happen by sending people in the garage and all of a sudden they come out like this.
Right.
This is the most intense development that you could ever imagine. And it wasn't intense like it wasn't fun, because it was so fun. We were having the time of our lives. But yeah, it was a connected project. And
that's got to be tough, though. I mean, you're working with family here. These aren't people that quit a job, came to work for you, didn't cut it, and had to get fired. You're not firing one of your kids now. So, like, how do you do that? I mean, I'm a father. I totally get it. And but like you have this group, and this group is the group. These are your 4 kids. They're not like you're going to replace the bass player with someone else necessarily, right?
Well, if they start being a jerk, I'm joking. Well, it isn't. Well, just to put it in perspective, it isn't like that either. It isn't my band. Now I'm developing them. We have mutual respect. This is and to put this in total perspective, part of like all the stuff I learned at church and people, that was such a large church and so successful. The people were so successful there. We learned so much about like creating the kind of family that we wanted to have. So I didn't say day one, I'm going to have a band that's going to come out of this family and this is what's going to happen. But day one, I was like, this is the kind of family I'm going to have, a family that loves each other, that's going to be super musical and fun and lighthearted, and to see the world with a glass half full kind of perspective of anything's possible. Let's love people, love God, and let's have as much fun as we can. And these kids being around all these session musicians and artists and string sections and ska bands and all these things in and out of my house was such unusual. It was such an unusual thing that 99% of people just couldn't imagine it. You know, like if you were 2 years old and, you know, Michael Landau is like one of the biggest session guys that is over, and your little kid's like, Dad, what's that? Oh, that's a 1960s Vox with a tremolo pedal. Want to try? Sure. You know, and then some session guy showing him how a chord is, or me showing him or how that pedal sounds. So day one, they had people and things that would just nurture all that was just around them to win if they so
Closing bell.
Yes. If they so chose to go this route, and they did. So to fast forward a little bit, the indie record thing completely stopped. Now, before we have any success, the band had 3 big, huge hills and valleys that were feeding frenzies of people dying to sign the band, and then it not happening. The deal was weird. Something about the paperwork, we didn't feel right. Something wasn't right. And I was convinced as I was developing this band that I did not want them releasing music too early that was associated with being a little kid. Because you got to realize, like,
Then becomes a gimmick, right?
it's a gimmick, and everybody's like, you need a TV show. There's Hannah Montana. And we're like,
geez.
you know, that whole thing. But this is like a real band, like real players that play to a click, that can program drums. They're all great guitar players and drummers and harmonies, and they can write with any other artist. So I was like, we're not going to do that. Even though if it's the right TV thing, sure, we'll take that as an outlet. Who wouldn't take it serious, you know? So the 3 hills and valleys were people trying to sign the band. It wasn't right, or it just didn't happen. That was hard to keep everyone's, you know, it was a trick to try to make sure that, not a trick, but it was a skill to have to learn to keep young kids from getting fully like jaded, you know, at 12 years old, after they've been told they're going to be signed 3 times by all these labels and going out to eat and we're high-fiving and all this stuff. So one big part of it, how I got out of the indie records, I didn't want to get stuck. So in 2009-ish, 10, let's just call it 10, I think, all the indie records went away, like dried up, gone. And I had $267 to my name. Okay. I don't use credit cards. I'm never going to go borrow money. I have 3 kids in private school. We've been chasing this dream. The money I took out of my house in 2006 to go chase this dream is all gone now. Okay. Sparing no expense with Echosmith. I'm being smart. I know how to handle money, but it's all gone. And the indie records are gone. Just like the old school jazz gigs were gone, then I had a new thing. So what happened was, this was a crucial time. This was 2010. We had 2 big hills and valleys. The third hadn't come yet, of people trying to sign the band and do all this stuff. So I had $267, and I'm like, we're in trouble. Now, I'm not going to go put that burden on my kids, but I just made sure that we were careful how we spent. We weren't spending any money. And I said, Mom's got to go to work and I've got to figure something out. Don't worry, though. It's going to be great. Remember, half glass full. This is the environment we live in. So the kids are like, it's all good, Daddy. We know God will take care of us and you're going to go make something happen. So that, again, it's the environment that we have. So I decide that I am going to basically figure out how to make money on eBay. And this sounds like a weird left turn, okay? And I had a full studio. So I'm like, I'm selling all my gear. I was always good at selling gear because it's like, if I bought something, I always made a profit, because back in the church days, all those vendors would kiss my butt because we may redo a sound system for $1 million. So every vendor was like, Jeffery, you know? Mm-hmm. So I always got great deals and stuff. So long story short, I guess it's still long, is I took a picture of the studio gear that I had, and I realized nobody was doing this on eBay. I took a picture. I took 10 pictures of all my studio gear, but had different things in it. I took a piece out, put a hat in one. I mean, just so it looked like I had 10 setups. Okay. And I knew
Right.
I could replicate this setup, a full recording rig. I could replicate it in 2 days. I had a computer guy, I had a Pro Tools dude, plugins, all this stuff. Mics, I could get it all cheap and make money. So I'm like, I have no idea. I have no money. I've got to figure this out. So I listed these 10 studio rigs and I made $100,000 the first month. And
Now hold on. This is all this is all your own gear that you sold, or you took pictures of it and then sort of resold the gear as needed to fill all the orders.
I first sold my gear, but I knew I could get it in 2 days. And I figured out, and this is part of like being I think a good producer or just an entrepreneur, you've got to figure stuff out. So
Right.
I noticed that in the eBay rules, they were like, okay, you have X number of days. You can choose what the days are. It's 3 to 10 days to basically ship out your order. And people see when they check out an order that what the deal is, how long they have. And I was always really honest with people. It's just like, hey, we're going to configure your computer. We're going to ship it out on Monday. We're going to whatever. And so I basically sold. I started this thing. It's called the Pro Tools Guy 310 on eBay. And dude, for 2 years, I was making hand over fist. Now I didn't make profit 100 that first month. I might have made like 30.
Sure.
And like I was making real money for 2 years. And all of a sudden I could completely get out of indie records. And I was just writing songs and going next level on developing Echosmith. Now we were going even deeper with stuff, having huge guys mix demos and stuff like that. So
See, that's a really important thing though that I want to touch on real quick, just because like there's so many people out there that, they say, okay, I'm a songwriter, I'm a producer, and I need to make my money being a songwriter or being a producer. And a lot of times what happens is that they spend all their time doing maybe things that working on projects they may not want to work on because it's delivering the money to them based on what they quote should do as a songwriter or a producer. And if I'm hearing you right, what you did basically was in order to give you the freedom you wanted to spend time on doing the music and the projects that you wanted to do, you actually found a way to use other assets to drive the money that you needed to pay for the time to do the things you wanted to do, not just the things that you had to do. That was a terrible way of explaining it, but I hope I got that across well. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
It's like, oh, I'm a writer, so I could only make money from writing. Well, no, I want to write a book, so I'm going to make money doing something else so I can afford the time to write the book I want to write. Otherwise, I'm spending all my time writing the other people's books.
That's a great way to think of it. And what it did was it was a really interesting thing. And, I'm a person of faith, so I really feel like
Sure.
God was really using these stop moments, blocking the road, stop, to refocus me because I'm a ding dong and I need like a bonk on the head to be like, go this way. And what it did was what I wasn't telling you too was I was doing like a writing session every single day, 5-6 days a week, during all that indie record time too, and grinding it out. And then what that did was making money from something else. It made me get a lot more choosy on the sessions. It also made me love doing music some more, and I could say no to something if I wanted to because I didn't have to. And you can't say no to a soccer mom. No offense to soccer moms. My kids played soccer. I'm not making fun of anybody. But no offense. But I didn't have to do one of those records.
Exactly. The freedom to say no, the freedom to pick the project you want to work on, and I think a lot of people don't really fully get that sometimes, particularly early on in a career, because of what you want to. You identify. You identify yourself with what you do, right? And do meaning how you make a living, for instance. Okay, and I think that could trap a lot of people because you end up in this like you said, getting stuck into a certain scene or whatnot because you feel like that's what you're supposed to be doing. Where sometimes you gotta break out of that in order to steer the ship in a new direction, and I think that's admirable. Not a lot of people get that. Sometimes people do it because they're forced to. Sometimes they do it because they see the path instead. I don't know, but it's something that we talk about all the time here. So that's why I think that was very interesting.
I realized what it was. The reason why I was so unusual in my path and figuring out was because at 40 years old was when I did a career change. So at 40 years old, I have 4 kids, 3 of them in private school, a mortgage. I'm a grown freaking man and I've got to figure it out. So that was some of the reasons. It was like, this is what a grown man does. A grown man provides for his family, and I'm going to sell crap on eBay if I have to. I don't care. You know what I mean? So anyway, fast forward 2011, a friend of mine used to play bass for me at this big church. Mike Elizondo, whose career exploded, got in with Dr. Dre, and he was part of like all these ginormous songs, all the Slim Shady, In the Club, 50 Cent. I mean, massive, massive records. So Mike gets hired at Warner Brothers Records. I hadn't seen Mike in 17 years. I reach out to Mike. I told my wife when he got hired, I know this sounds crazy, but I think he got hired to sign the band. She's like, okay. Remember, we see the world half glass full. So we're always thinking of the possibilities. So we're like, I think he did. So I reach out to Mike. Mike, it's Jeffery David. What's happening? Long time. He goes, oh my gosh, how are you? I'm like, I'm wonderful. I'm really excited. I'm producing records, writing songs. I'm not in the church anymore, but I wanted to share with you a band I've been developing that I'm super stoked on. And he's like, oh, I'd love to hear it. I haven't signed anything yet. I'm wanting to sign something. Send it to me. No promises, but I'd love to hear it. I send it to him. He goes, check it.
You don't tell them it's your kids.
I never start with that ever.
Okay.
Never.
No, I just want to check.
Yeah, no, it's good. There's a reason I don't, but I don't need to get into it now. But a week goes by. He goes, check in. I check it again. Mike, have you heard it yet? He goes, I'm so sorry. I haven't yet. Give me another week. So long story short, 4 weeks go by. I say, Mike, this is your last chance. Now other labels are really coming on strong. I go, P.S. These are my 4 kids. He called me within the hour, laughing on the phone. And he's like, dude, this is so good. This is so good. I'm obsessed. So then Mike goes, I have to meet the band. I want to see you. Please come to my studio Monday. And then all weekend long, he's fully texted me like crazy. One note for anybody getting into the music business or forgetting this one note who's already in the music business. You never have to wonder if someone's into something that you're doing. You will know.
You will know immediately.
You will know. They will blow your phone up. They will competitively try to get you before anybody else. No news is no. So just side note, that's a sidebar. So Mike, we go meet Mike on Monday, and Mike is like, it's so great to catch up with him. My friend Mike, who back in the day needed $75 way 17 years earlier at this church, certainly doesn't need $17 or $75 anymore. This guy is a successful major player and had the most beautiful studio I've ever seen. So he's like, listen, I shared it with my boss, Rob Cavallo, who's the CEO of Warner Brothers. He's obsessed too. We're going to have a meeting on tomorrow morning. I'll call you. He calls me Tuesday morning. Pull the band out of school. We're signing the band today. I call the band. Get out of the Spanish class. Come outside now. You're going to Warner. Now you got to realize though, and we're all in this together, and we're all full stoked, loving life. But we've been here before. We've done the high five. We've gone out to eat, celebrating the Atlantic.
Yeah, you've had the hills. You've had the valleys. You're in another hill. Who knows if it's another valley?
But this feels good, and this feels really good. So we go to Warner. We spend 3 hours with Rob Cavallo and Mike and the band and myself. And the band played something acoustically, and Rob asked all these questions. Rob's brilliant. I so look up to Rob. And at the end of that meeting, Rob's like, we would be honored if you would sign to Warner, would you? And we said, we all looked at each other and we said, yes. And so then we took a year. We did to go out to eat. And then we took a year from there to write all these songs. And the band made it really clear that they wrote songs with me. And there was a chemistry there. And they explained it to Rob to make sure Rob knew. Because what a lot of times will happen to labels, they'll just want to take the whole thing over and they will insert the usual suspects, right?
Right.
And a lot of the usual suspects are great. But in this example, there was some real chemistry, even though we were related, that we had as songwriters together.
Well, I would say it's because, not just even though.
Exactly.
Right?
But not everybody understands that. So it's a fine line right there. Okay. Here I am, the manager, but I've been producing everything that the label liked to sign them, and I recorded the songs. So how am I going to navigate this world when Mike, the A&R, is a producer and wants to produce a record? So we had to basically just say, Mike was like, I'm going to produce this record. I don't want to do it with anybody else. In other words, I don't want to co-produce it with you. And I'm like, fine. And I'm like, I'm just going to be the best songwriter and producer I can and manager, or the best songwriter and manager in this situation. Meanwhile, I'm still working with other artists, small artists, but it's growing. So we write all these songs, turn it in. There was a long process to all of it. And the record got delayed to make it for 2 months. We were pissed because, you feel like 2 months is forever, but it's nothing. But it felt like forever. In that 2 months, I told the band, I'm like, let's just keep writing. Dude, we wrote every single song on that first album in those 2 months. including Cool Kids and Bright. Bright was a massive song for us too. And if we wouldn't have had that break, it was totally a God move again. We wouldn't have written those songs. It's crazy. So we release a record, and now immediately the band they take this song "Cool Kids" to college radio very slowly, but in the process, the band was touring nonstop, and we are now in the band that's doing shows. They're doing Warped Tour. They're doing all these things, grinding it out. We're saying yes to everything. That's our motto. Say yes, it brings a yes. Casting vision with the band all the time. Say yes, we're going to get more. So we're saying yes. We're out working everybody we knew on Warped Tour up at 7 a.m., plastering posters and set times. And I had the band go through the lines every morning for 2 hours, singing songs, handing out CDs. They had no fan base whatsoever.
Yeah, you got to build.
We go on the road. I'm their manager on the road. My wife's the tour manager. I'm driving the RV, and we have like one tech guy, and it's like 105 degrees, and we are on a truck stage at least a mile away from the Winnebago. And we had to lug gear at 105 degrees in, 104 degrees humidity. So the band's doing these shows. One person shows up, 2, 5, eventually 10, 50, 200, 300 people are singing these songs. And somewhere in that process, iTunes had that free song of the week, and they chose Cool Kids as the free song of the week. And it was one of the most downloaded songs in the program that they ever had. And Cool Kids was now making a massive, massive move around planet Earth. Like every country, it started a chart. We're going to Europe. We're touring everywhere, and it's great. So I had an interesting time because my own attorney was like, "This is your time. You probably need to let the band go travel. Maybe send your wife, but you should probably. This is the time you should be staying at home now and jumping off the success of this record, Cool Kids, and then eventually Bright was going to come out, and you shouldn't go on the road with the band. It's going to divert your attention." But
from writing other things,
from writing songs and launching my own career more from these hit songs that I was very responsible contributor of, part of.
Sure.
And it was also really important to try to, at the same time, teach people. This is another thing I would say to people that you're listening. It's our job to basically train people how they're supposed to see us. Okay. So I have multiple roles. So I didn't want to be known as dad. I never introduced myself as dad, even though I'm very proud of being a father.
Sure. But there's a reason. I get that totally.
I'm a producer. I'm a songwriter. These are amazing songs. They wouldn't be here if I didn't contribute. And some of these, I started the songs and, whatever. But at the same time, as a father, and your kids are one's in junior high, they're all in high school, I'm not going to let them go travel planet Earth. And I got to protect them. So I decided to go on all of it. I've only missed 2 shows in their entire 12-year run. And it was really important that I was there for all the Warped Tours and all the Owl Cities and Neon Trees and 21 Pilots and all that stuff. Because number one, I can end up mixing the live show because I produce records. I know how the song should sound. But secondly, I need to protect them.
Yes.
And, there were multiple times that older dudes are hitting on Sydney in the band, or older girls are trying to hit on Graham or Noah or Jamie. And it's a wild world, and it's important. And I kept fast forwarding. This is important to do, I think, for anybody. Whatever you're doing and you're chasing, always fast forward to the end of your life and picture yourself and say, what am I going to care about at the end? What you're going to care about at the end is what you should care about now.
Exactly.
I'm not going to care about when I'm 90 years old, hopefully, okay, healthy, still doing what I do, or whenever that time comes, because we all exit, right? Whenever that time comes, I'm not going to say on my last breath, guys, go get me my plaques, or I just want to see my bank statement one more time, or who show me my Wikipedia, or who did I write with again? I'm going to be like, we chased a dream together. We wrote songs that are meaningful to millions of people. And we did it, and we love each other. Game over. What's really better than that? I did it with my family.
That's a perspective that I think is a great place to end on as well. Because I think what you've done here is you've really given us an interesting perspective on how a career can take its own arc whether you design it or not, right? Whether you open the door or whether the door was open for you, whether you close the door, the door was closed for you, and that kind of thing. I think those are, one door opens, one door closes, another door opens can be seen as a cliche, but I think it's a cliche for a reason because it's absolutely true, and that's sort of how you really manage this throughout. And I think the other thing that I wanted to end on is just this idea of patience, this idea of using what might be considered the value in the hills of Valley to your advantage. You spent a long period of time in your career working just within what I will, for lack of a better word, call the confines of a church, which is really what allow you to build your skills in order to take them to another place once you were ready to do so, and so on. Like all those things made sense. None of this would be possible had you not taken those first steps early on. And there's so many people that want to just jump right into the limelight, right? And then, to take advantage of those, of the light not being on you in the best way possible, I think is another lesson from your career that we could kind of pull out of this. But yeah, I just to bring it back to what you just said, I think the real greatest place to end on is just understand that, look at what you're doing now with the eye of who you are in 30 years from now, and is it right for you, and is it something you be proud of? I think that's a really strong statement.
Well, thank you. Sorry. I appreciate it, man. And by taking the path I have, I've been blessed to work with some of my favorite people in the world that came around anyway by putting my family first and protecting them and shepherding this career. I've got to work with some of the greatest people in the world. So I'm grateful.
It's great. Well, listen, good luck to you guys with what's next. Good luck on the digital tour. I think it's a good thing you guys are being flexible in these, as they say, unprecedented times, to add another cliche to the conversation. But is there any last ideas or any last things you want to promote or point out before we part today?
Well, I would just say, hey, go get the new record. I produced this second record, Lonely Generation, and co-wrote the songs with the band. And we're really proud of this work. And the songs are so important for what we're going through today. And songs like Lonely Generation and Everyone Cries and Lonely and Shut Up and Kiss Me and all these different kind of songs that basically have a deeper meaning that says, hey, life is short, love each other. And especially with this Corona stuff and all that, it's just go dig into the record, put some headphones on, get lost in the music, and I'll see you guys around.
All right. Listen, thanks very much. Be well, be safe, and I hope to talk to you again someday soon.
Okay, buddy. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. To keep up with Jeff and Echosmith, check out their social media profiles linked in the show notes. Be sure to tune in next time for a brand new episode and hit that subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you next time.